We're at the home of Patrick Henry, patriot, 5-time governor of Virginia, and the man who said, "Give me liberty or give me death." About an hour south of Monticello is Patrick Henry's home of Red Hill. After a welcoming check-in and a well-done orientation film, I'm greeted with a surprise. We're out at Red Hill. Is that the name? Red Hill. This is the home of Patrick Henry.
Yep, the last home and the burial place of Patrick Henry.
Excellent. And I'm speaking to a direct descendant, 5th and 6th generation.
Yes, you are.
Of Patrick Henry. Name?
My name is Patrick Henry Jolly, and as Scott mentioned, I'm a direct descendant of Patrick Henry. He is both my 5th and my 6th great-grandfather.
Wow, that's great story. So it's a super surprise. Come in here to Red Hill. You go in the visitor center, and here is Patrick Henry giving you the tour. Personal tour. Yeah, exactly. Patrick Henry Jolly. Exactly. It's fantastic. But I mean, I've learned a ton about Patrick Henry. And Red Hill was his final home. His grave is here. He died here. He spent maybe the last 4 years of his life or something like that.
He spent basically the last 4 years of his life full-time living here. He was bouncing around between here and another plantation for a couple of years. But yeah, this is where he lived out the last couple years of his life. And as you mentioned, Scott, this is where he died and this is where he's buried.
Patrick Henry was a key actor in the Revolution, in the American Revolution. Yes. So what are maybe something that people don't usually realize about Patrick Henry?
A lot of times people don't think about Patrick Henry and they don't necessarily think of his governorship, that he was a 5-time governor of the state of Virginia. He was their first elected governor after we declared our independence. Virginia, before July 4th and Congress declaring independence and the whole birth of the nation, by the end of June, Virginia had declared their intent to become independent. They had written a state constitution and they had elected Patrick Henry as their first governor. People rarely associate Patrick Henry with the Bill of Rights, but he was a huge proponent and a leader of the effort for a Bill of Rights to be attached to our Constitution. I mean, just imagine that document if the Bill of Rights was not there. And the original drafters, the original authors of the Constitution, James Madison and Company, were not in favor initially of having amendments added to the Constitution. So Patrick made sure that that pro-amendment senators were elected, and he wanted to make sure that we as American citizens, as citizens of the United States, that we had specific freedoms, specific rights. And if we go the other direction, if we go before the American Revolution, in 1765, the Stamp Act became a topic that basically would put a tax on the colonists. And Patrick Henry felt that tax was illegal, and he proposed resolutions for Virginia to resist this tax. And this is in 1765. And when those resolutions were passed, that created the first kind of official crack in the relationship between the colonies and Great Britain. And Thomas Jefferson points to that moment as Patrick Henry giving first impulse to the ball of the American Revolution.
This is the letter opener that Patrick Henry actually brandished when he gave his speech, and he held it up as a dagger that said, "Give me liberty or give me death." Red Hill would have been Patrick Henry's home from about 1794 to 1799, and just as he was entering his retirement years, this is similar to the original cabin that would have been here. If you could just look for the door and the 2 windows in the center with the chimney. So Patrick Henry would have had a 2-room and 1.5 floor kind of house, a very modest house that he lived in, even after all his success before and after the Revolutionary War, as governor of Virginia, as a lawyer. He lived modestly. Now this house has been, it was burnt down in 1918. It had been added onto quite a bit on both sides, with wings added on both sides from his descendants that had enlarged the house, but unfortunately the house burned down. And so this has been reconstructed on the original foundations. All right, let's go inside. The detached kitchen. Osage orange tree that's about 350 years old. So it would have been here when Patrick Henry was here. Would have been about 100 years old then. The reconstructed law offices of Patrick Henry. This would have been Patrick Henry's law office when he came to Red Hill in 1794. He turned the old overseer's quarters into his law offices. This is a copy of his right to practice law in Goochland County. It wasn't his bedroom, it was the bachelor's quarters, so maybe his son or sons and nephews slept there. Patrick Henry had 17 children by 2 wives, and he had over, I cannot remember the number, 77 grandkids, maybe even more than that. Patrick Henry would sit under this honey locust tree and look out upon the plains, out over all his fields, down from here down into the river that would have been planted with tobacco or wheat. What started as a 700-acre tract, Henry expanded into 2,930 acres. It would have been slave labor he was directing. I think there was about 60 to 70 slaves on this property, and there's a memorial and a tribute to the community that was here at the time and then remained after emancipation. The slaves would have taken care of all the crops, but also the forge, the blacksmith shop. They would have taken care of the gardens and the cooking and all the household tasks. The carriage house here. We're heading down the Quarter Place Trails, which would have been where the enslaved population and then also the freed population would have lived after emancipation. It's called Quarter Place because this was where the quarters were, so it's the place for the quarters. Inside the replica slaves cabin, you can read about the daily lives of slaves in slavery at Red Hill. Several slaves or a family would have resided in this 1.5-story structure, which doesn't seem to be that much smaller than Patrick Henry's original home. The storyboards give a picture of Patrick Henry. Henry owned slaves, initially through family gifts, but in the end he made and managed his own purchases and owned slaves until his death. Slaves were a valuable part of the operation of Red Hill. Henry saw the value of keeping slave families together. He also recognized complications with his own ideology and wrote in 1773 that the abolishment of slavery is the furthest advance we can make toward justice. The purity of our religion is at variance with that law which warrants slavery. Each slave could work about 3 acres, and Red Hill had 60 acres under tobacco cultivation. Red Hill yielded over 20,000 pounds of tobacco each year. Tobacco plants were grown and harvested. The stalks were then split, and they were hung in drying houses or pits for 4 to 6 weeks. This is a tobacco barn where leaves would be set to dry on the racks. Goes way up there. This is an old ordering pit where tobacco leaves would be placed in it, and there'd be a fire burning at the bottom of it and drying the tobacco, and they wanted a certain amount of humidity to keep the leaves moist. Leaves were then pressed into barrels called hogsheads and transported by river to Richmond and Lynchburg. Down the hill towards the end of Quarter Place is a historic cemetery. There's a train going right up there. 147 graves in this cemetery. It's an enslaved and African American cemetery, since there were freed slaves or freed African Americans buried here also after the Civil War and up into even 1923. The site was hilly and had little agricultural use, typical of burial sites for enslaved populations. I imagine you could board one of the cars on that train and it would take you on. Patrick Henry had just taken a position in 1799 as Burgess, but was not able to fulfill the role as he had some intestinal issues. He actually died of intestinal blockage here at Red Hill. His fame, his best epitaph. Well, that was a surprisingly fun afternoon at Red Hill. I felt like I got a private tour there. It was amazing. I mean, it's like the curator came out. We talked for a while about all the pieces he had. The two people that were helping give the tours got personal one-on-one attention. So it was a great experience. So way to go, Red Hill. Enjoyed learning know way more about Patrick Henry than I knew before, so thank you. Wondering if these are all the old cabins from Quarter Place, or maybe they're just old houses and barns. With old Monticellos. I've seen this around several places. Alright, welcome to North Carolina. Goodbye, Virginia. I'm learning French, and I'm learning the French R is like a R. It's like say R. It's kind of like saying the word air plus having an H with it. I've noticed the same thing about people speaking in Virginia. If they have the real pronounced Virginian accent, it's Virginia. I've left my horse in Virginia. I'm sure that was terrible.